Morten Damgaard Andersen has worked in the transport and logistics industry in Asia for over 30 years. His knowledge of what it takes to operate at a senior leadership position in the industry is reflected by the depth of his knowledge in the human element of leadership, in understanding and leveraging behaviors.
Developing your emotional intelligence and so on, right? And you practice and you do self-reflection and you do, seek feedback from others. And
his aim in this podcast is to give the listeners who are at an early stage of their leadership career or want to move into leadership some things to consider in a leadership position that goes beyond the numbers, and how these things ultimately do help to deliver stronger results. So now, without further delay, let's begin. How does self-awareness contribute to a leader's emotional intelligence?
it's a great question, and for me, it's the understanding of your own emotions, your own strengths and weaknesses, and how they influence your behaviors. We all have good days and bad days. That's one thing. We also are all unique in our own way, and how we generally behave, and what triggers us, both positively and negatively. So that awareness to understand how that can impact your day and the people around you enables you to moderate it, to adjust for it, knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Say that you are not, like myself, a particularly detailed person. So having people around you who have that skill set, have that innate behavior, is probably a good thing, right? Because you'll be able to play together. So I think the awareness of this and the awareness of yourself enables you to manage your emotions and make informed decisions, and generally also empathize with others, which obviously at the end of the day is the big thing.
So, based on that, are there any potential drawbacks or challenges associated with an overemphasis on emotional intelligence and leadership?
There is, right? And I think when you look at developing your emotional intelligence and so on, right? And you practice and you do self-reflection and you do, seek feedback from others, and maybe you've been on training. A lot of companies will do that, right? So you're actually working on improving yourself and your interpersonal relationships and all of those things. There is a risk of that you become over influenced by this, right? And that you sort of, because there's always an emotional angle to things, that you potentially avoid making tough decisions, that you neglect other critical leadership skills. One of the things that for a number of years that I think has been really, really important, sort of, that doesn't tie into the emotional intelligence, but that's this thing around having an edge. So not being afraid of making tough decisions that are the right decisions, but because they generally tough decisions tend to impact people, right? And they're uncomfortable. And because they're uncomfortable, because you impact people, do you shy away from that? So having that edge, as an example, is an important thing. You're doing the right thing, but then your emotional intelligence makes sure that you do these things with empathy.
So can you give an example?
A big example would be if you are forced to close down an office in a business because for financial reasons, right? And ultimately, that obviously impacts people. And not only does it impact the people that work for you, these people tend to have families, right? So it impacts, the impact actually is pretty significant. So do you shy away from that decision because you have to go in and talk to people that they're actually losing their jobs, and you know that some people will react differently, and some people will react very historically, and other people will react very emotionally. That's hard, right? That's really, really, really hard. I would say, fortunately, that it's a hard thing to do, right? So do you shy away because of that, and you do not execute it fast enough, or you do not do it at all because of these emotional aspects of it? And that's the edge of saying, this is the right thing to do for me and the company, but I can still do it the right way. So yeah, I do think there is that risk of the emotional aspects of it overtaking, and you're not mixing it right with the rational decision making, if that's the right way to put it.
So how would you balance that as an individual? Because if you're struggling with that, where do you take it? Because a struggle is a struggle, and you're delaying, and you're
Yeah,
also possibly telling yourself or making excuses to yourself that it'll blow over or something will change. I just need to,
yeah, yeah.
this.
So what works for me is actually putting the action out there, in terms of saying, right, we're going to do this, or you're telling your superior, this is the plan, this is what I'm going to do. So you're committing, right? And once it's out there, you have a different kind of scenario, because now you actually have to deliver something that you've promised, right? And that's easier on big ticket items, like if you have to close down an office or something like that. I think it's a lot harder when it's smaller staff related issues, which it tends to be. Maybe somebody's behaving in a way that's not conducive for the team, or it's not aligned with the way that the company wants people to behave, etc. Right? So I think it is, again, I do it through conversations with peers, or with my superior, or with the team, if it's the people that report directly to me, because for me that's sort of, now I've committed to it. Now I've said that we're going to do this. We're going to take these actions, and so on and so forth. And that pushes it through for me. So I would say that giving yourself that push by putting things out there is probably the best way to do it. Because if you go with it, you can find all kinds of excuses for not doing something, right?
But in what situations can adapting to diverse behaviours lead to a more effective communications? So can you give us an example of situations?
So I think people are different, and people respond and are inspired by different things. Some people, if we are very basic, some people prefer written. Some people prefer verbal. Some are visual, right? So that's one avenue where you say, right, how do I cover people? Some people listen to things, and they need to go back and think about it. Others are able to respond immediately, right? So that's a good example of how do I make sure that I get everybody along with me? And then the other part of that is that what inspires people is different. When you look at it as an individual, some people are inspired by achieving stuff, right? That's what makes them tick. If you want them If you want to convince them to work overtime, that's what say, hey, this will help you in achieving your goals. This will help you grow. This will, other people are inspired by being a trusted team member, and it's important to them, right? So they wouldn't be inspired about the achievement. They would be inspired by saying, hey, this really helps the team out. So when you look at, if you just take those two examples, right, how you would communicate a vision or a task or a goal or whatever would be different depending on who you're talking to. And then of course you have to do that balance. One thing is you're talking one-on-one like we are now, and you're able to 100% focus on that one individual. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you're talking to very large groups. How do you make sure that you get everybody with you? I think there's when it comes to communication, I think there's an underestimation of how many times you have to communicate the same story for it to actually filter through and get out to all parts of the organization. So, great example would be if I now asked you to go out and communicate to someone what I just told you. Assuming that you're 100% in agreement with it, you would still go out and communicate it in what you think you've heard. And even if you paid full attention, even if you're 100% in agreement, you would not be able to communicate it the way that I have. So you'd go out and you communicate it. So now that person has 75% of my story, right? And then it's like the old children's game where you stand in a line and the first person says something and the last person is supposed to repeat what that first person said. That's a perfect example of how difficult communication is, right? So making sure that you repeat that story, that you constantly tell the same story, enables people to eventually be able to tell it the same way, with their own words, but telling the exact same story. So there's an element there that needs to be considered. But I think when we go back to the diverse behaviors, these assessments that are available, for me, are actually it's something that I've worked with, and some companies use them, some don't. But if you were to build a team that has diverse behaviors, how do you do that if you don't know what to look for? You might do it, but there would be a significant element of luck in that, right? So for me, whichever system you might want to choose to use, I think it's a big advantage when you are able to assess people. And there's nothing secret in, right? You tell people what it's not a test, it's an assessment, right? So this is who you are as a person. Most people will nod and say, yep, that's me, because most people tend to like themselves and say, hey, that's me, these are my strengths, right? I am a detailed person. I am an outgoing person. I like to sit on my own and work, right? Yes, that's me, and I like me, so that's cool, right? So, but it helps you to say, Ray, I need different types of individuals too, in my team to make sure that we can perform better and deliver better results overall.
So what role does cultural competence play in understanding and managing diverse behaviors?
I think it plays a massive role. It's vital actually to understand and people's cultural background, where they're from, and what that means in terms of behaviors and reactions and there's a lot of very, very good books on this that can actually help people, even if you've not worked in multiple countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that every culture has different norms and different styles of communication, right? They might be very direct or very indirect, and I think a good example would be if you're working with people from Holland, from the Netherlands, extremely direct. I think probably the most direct people in the world, right? Where a spade is a spade, and they will tell it to your face, and they don't care how many people are standing around it, and that's acceptable in Holland, right? You do that in Japan.
Yeah.
I mean, that's cultural suicide, right?
Yeah.
Where it's very indirect, and it definitely is never in a public space where other people, particularly from the company, can see that you have having a discussion about performance or whatever it might be, right? So I think it's always an important aspect, and even if you're working in what you would consider a non-diverse environment, people are still different, depending on. So for me, I'm from Denmark, right? And that's a small country, and you'd say, okay, so what are the cultural differences in a country like that? So I'm from the capital, Copenhagen, but I did my time in the army in northern Jutland, which is sort of more or less as far away as you can get from Copenhagen. And I had to adjust my behaviors. I wasn't aware of it initially, so I made a lot of mistakes, right, in terms of how I talked and what I did and what I didn't do. And that's just within a country, right? So when you then move abroad, and I would encourage anybody to move out of their comfort zone and learn and say, hey, everything is not the same way that it is, and you can do that within a country, right? As I say. But understanding how that impacts and how you can really be the proverbial bull in a china shop if you're not aware of this, right? And it goes both ways. If you've grown up in a country that has a very indirect way of communication, and now you're working in a country that has a much more direct type of communication, that won't work either. Because people will say, well, I'm not getting any information, I'm not getting any feedback, I'm not getting any, So having that understanding of how people generally react and so on, right? And it's interesting here in Singapore, because you speak to many people, it's easy to move here, and it's and I agree with that in general, that everybody speaks English, and the laws and the regulations very, very straightforward, right? But often you come into an office environment where there are 5, 6, 8, 10 different nationalities with different cultural backgrounds and norms, and even in Singapore, take away all the people that are coming from overseas to work here, but even in Singapore, the Chinese versus the Indian versus the Malays, they might all be Singaporean and share that, but they also have somewhat different cultural norms when it comes to that, right? So having that understanding is a really big thing, because you can kind of see where it would go wrong when you try and communicate something, and you think you've communicated it clearly, and all you've managed to do is confuse people or annoy people, or you're not clear enough because you're not direct enough, and so I don't understand what he or she's saying, because this is not clear enough to me, right? So yeah, it plays a huge. There's a huge impact of it. It plays a huge role in how you build your teams, how you build a cohesive team that are able to work together and deliver results. Yeah.
So you've been in the industry, what, over 20 years? I think it's 25 years you've been in the industry. Is that?
30 plus, yeah.
Oh, 30 plus.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So, so with all that experience, and from what you've said before, you've obviously created a inspirational leadership style of your own, um, from
mm,
from your own success. So, questions I can, think of some questions I can ask around that. So, what are the key components of a leadership style that resonates with team members? And also, we're looking at culture as well here
yeah.
because you're working with in a multicultural environment. So,
Um, I think number one, well, I don't really want to rank them, but having a vision for what you are, not what you are, where you want to go, even if you're sitting in a team within a company, right? You can have a vision for your team that ties in with the overall vision of the company. So a clear vision of what you want to where you want to get to and what you want to achieve. Effective communication, we talked about that, but having effective communication and essentially over communicate and engage with people. Empathy, we talked about. I think two other things. One is authenticity. And I know that this is a very common thing, but being authentic, being yourself and who you are, um, and then being able to inspire people. And that's challenging because people are people are inspired by different things, right? Um, I think it's also very important to sort of set framework of what I call them my non-negotiables, right? Of what are the behaviors that I expect from us particularly as a leadership team, as a senior team, etc. What is it that I will not tolerate? One example for me is, respect. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter where you work in the company, what position. Everybody, as an individual, deserves respect, right? So I don't deserve, as a leader in a team, I don't deserve any more respect than my team members or the person that empties the trash can every morning or vacuums the floor or anything, right? They play a role in the company and they're human beings, so they deserve just fundamental basic respect. If I see anybody doing that and not respecting other people, they're gone. That's something I will not accept. That's a non-negotiable. So I have a number of those, and I think setting that up for yourself as having these things and being very clear on them, so people know what it is, right? So one thing, what I like, for example, is I don't want surprises. And that ties into communicating, as in, in my industry, shit happens, and it on a regular basis because there's so many shipments that move around, and eventually something will go wrong with one of them. And what we want to make sure is that doesn't come as a surprise. We should be the first to know. So that the customer calls and they say, hey, I heard this. I've heard about it. So I can confidently say, hey, we're working on it, right? And it's very clear that if I haven't heard about it, you're sort of talking in circles and so, but the customer knows that you don't know, right? I don't want to hear it from my boss. I want to hear it from the team. And that boils down to effective communication and not being afraid of consequences when something goes wrong, right? So there's a whole messaging around that. So I think setting those frames around the behaviors that you want in your team, and that's something that resonates because people can connect to it and say, yep, this is something I want to be part of, or this is something I don't want to be part of, which is, that's okay too. It's not that these are the right ones and everything else is wrong. No, these are just the ones that I want. And of course they connect to the company's larger values. But then you have to be passionate, right? I think passion is undervalued in many things. Getting somebody who's passionate is often, that's what I often look for, right? And so, people that are passionate about what they want to do and how they do it and stuff like that. Often better than whatever their CV says. Can I feel that passion?
Yeah.
But that people connect to that as well, right? Then I think it's really important as a leader to understand the shadow that you cast. And it's big, and it's took me some time also to understand that, right? And I think I got a live example of that one day many years ago. I get into an office and we're walking through, and part of the wall or a pillar or whatever it was red. And I commented on that as just a throwaway comment, kind of like, oh, that's funny, that wall is red, right? Everything else was white, that was red, And it wasn't kind of part of a design or anything, it just was, right? So it's just a throwaway comment. Next time I was in that office, the wall was white.
So, okay.
Right?
So, yeah.
And that made me totally think on, well, hang on a minute. I didn't care. I didn't, right? That wasn't the purpose of my comment. It was just an observation, a funny observation. So, oh, that's strange, right? And I got taken literally. So that shadow you cast as a leader, having an understanding of that and being approachable and human when you can.
If you'd like to get in touch with Morten, reach out to him on LinkedIn. And remember, relevant links for this episode will also be in the show notes on asiabizstories.com.